I'm going to be full-blown honest with you.
Go ahead.
Up until the moment of release, I was worried the game was too easy. The critique of this game is really hard. Is it the Dark Souls a platform? And all these things, I'm like, really?
Before we start, Lou, could you tell us your job, your position, and how long you worked for Toys for Bob, your previous jobs and projects? Just general industry summary.
My name is Lou Studdert. I'm the creative producer at Toys for Bob. I've been here for about 3.5 years, but I have been working with Toys for Bob much longer than that because before being part of Toys for Bob, I was actually their producer at Activision. Previous titles I worked on obviously Crash 4, but when I was at Activision, I worked on Crash Team Racing, I worked on the Insane trilogy for Crash Bandicoot, I also worked on Destiny 2 for a good bit, I worked on all of the Skylanders games. So whole history of games.
You find out that you are working on the next entry of the Crash Bandicoot franchise, not a remake, not a remaster. What are your thoughts?
Honestly, it came about in such an interesting way of figuring out, hey, this is this really great, brand, this really great series that we all love. We've had experiences with Crash from Skylanders to obviously the Insane trilogy to CTR to all that stuff. And it's a huge open question of where do you go with it? There are a million directions that we need to both navigate and also pick from. Is it just the character and the identity and we're making a new type of game? Is it the same character but we're just trying to make new levels? Is it, an open world? It's like, what do you do with this kind of game? And what would make both kind of the hungry fans happy who haven't had a new game in a long time, as well as what would be fulfilling to us as developers, what would be super fun to make. And so, a lot of it is straight up panic because there's so many different ways you can go. There's so many different games you could make. And so from there, it's just, figuring out both, what do we want to do and then how do we do it?
So now let's go months or maybe even years into the development. You got your structure out, like you know what you're doing, okay, this is a sequel. Was there any hurdles at the time, whether it be 2 days before the game releases or a year before? Was there one prevalent concern once you got the structure of the game laid out?
I think the biggest one for me was, are we being too nostalgic or not nostalgic enough? While we were making this game, to see the success of the Insane trilogy, it then fills you as developers and detail-oriented people with a million questions, right? Like, are people going to develop such a muscle memory that we need to have the exact same jump and movement metrics from the original game? Or can we make it feel different? Like, are we gonna make people, not have a good time because we're changing that? There are so many things that I could point to in the game that in the grand scheme of things aren't gonna make or break a game, and yet passionate, hard-fought decision-making and hard-fought conversations going into it. Like an example of that would be, do the Wumpa auto slurp to your character when you break a crate, right? Like, That's not a big, really, in the grand scheme of things, that's not gonna make, someone who's playing the game go, nope, I don't want to play this game. But at the same time, that is such a fundamental question. And so that's the level that we're talking about, where it's like you're looking at every aspect of a long admired, series, and then second guessing yourself. So we actually didn't have that auto slurp until much later in development because we were trying to get the fundamentals right. And then from there go, okay, what are the things that kind of feel like they could use an update, that feel like a quality of life update here, a quality of life update there would just make the experience feel more rich. And that's where you kind of focus in and go, is this, fundamental? Is changing this at the cost of being different actually going to be an improvement or an enjoyment kind of uptick? And that's an example of one where it was like, we had long conversations. I'm sure I came down and was like, no, we should not. What are we doing? And it's like, in the grand scheme of things, of course, have the Wumpa. You found the crate, you broke the thing, get it, sure.
Right.
And that's the kind of stuff. And then you get into your head is like, oh man, someone's gonna really hate that.
So what's really cool about Crash 4 is that it had a lot of frequent like public updates leading up to the release. What was one that you were shocked, and which one was like, oh, they didn't like that, or oh, it wasn't as big as I would have expected, on either side of the spectrum?
The constant updates was great for us. And I think that actually went to kind of the mentality of this game of being just full of ideas. Because again, we had, so long and so much rich history and so many other kind of peers and things to look at, that we were able to assemble all these different ideas and inject them into the game. So I remember personally being very worried initially revealing the additional playable characters, because again, it had been so long, and we've seen other games and franchises over-index on taking their focus away from the main character. And so we were very, very careful on both how much they should be in the game, how they should divert from the feeling of kind of the core experience, and also whether or not they were required for play, and progressing through the story. And so when we were revealing Dingodile, Tana, Cortex, it was this fine line of, we're super excited, we feel that these characters are really cool gameplay, but at the same time, we didn't want to scare people away into thinking that, the game has been chopped into chunks and you're only getting your classic Crash experience for a quarter of the time, because that's not the case. Finding that way to be enthusiastic and really excited about this thing that we did, while also being, but don't get scared,
Yeah, it's still Crash Bandicoot.
Yeah. And so that was, I remember us tiptoeing very, very okay, we're gonna be really pumped, but not, and so that was one, and the response was great. The response was really cool. The response was really exciting. Personally, for me, talking about the flashback levels, because that was kind of our fun, weird experiment zone, and to see people get excited about that was really cool.
The game launches, the reviews start to pour in. What are your thoughts about the critics' reviews? Did you read any of them? And was there a review or maybe a critique that stood out to you, and why?
I mean, honestly, yes. I read them. I was very, very nervous, the night before things came out. Obviously, no sleep, and then you wake up and everything went swimmingly. We were very pleased, myself included, very, very pleased at the response. And one of the things, I'm going to be full-blown honest with you.
Go ahead.
Up until the moment of release, I was worried the game was too easy. And the critique of, this game is really hard, is it the Dark Souls of platform? And all these things, I'm like, really? I was terrified that we had made too easy of a game. Straight up, I was super paranoid that people were going to play our game and go, oh, the Skylanders developers made it Crash that was too easy. Full blown. I to this day, I am both shocked and relieved at the response.
That is really funny, because now there's other questions like this in the future that we're gonna be bringing up, because this is gonna be fun. So we're gonna get to an interesting bit now, because games nowadays go through a lot of scrutiny even before they launch, due to social media and the uprise of the popularity of gaming journalism. However, the worst part is sometimes the headlines aren't even true. Let's start with one of the very first headlines that started to spread around that you personally made sure you spearheaded in every showcase that Crash Bandicoot 4 had. That headline was that the skins in Crash Bandicoot 4 would be accessible by microtransactions. Internally, what was the studio's reaction when that false headline was starting to be spread? And then what was your reaction before you spearheaded it and told everyone that it was false?
When we were making the game, there was a question of whether or not we should or wanted to have skins. And I personally fought tooth and nail for a long time to not have skins at all, because we thought people would think there'd be microtransactions. I was like, I didn't even want them in there, because I thought the first reaction was people going to say that there were microtransactions. And we had never once entertained the idea, never once was part of our design, never once was any of the conversations with, Activision or anyone. We wanted to make a game that was self-contained. it was one of those things where, initially we weren't going to have skins. And then we started to figure out fun rewards. We had, some artists with some time. There were some really great ideas. And it was like, yeah, this would be really fun. We get some really cool ideas. But then it became like we need to be very, very careful. We need to be super clear about this. And that's why when, even the first inkling of there are skins, it's like there's blood in the water. People smell, they realize, they're like, ugh. We had to be abundantly clear. No microtransactions. We knew that would be coming. We knew that kind of mentality had been brewing over the years. And so we just knew ahead of time, we have to be ultra clear about this. And we have to be ultra careful. And so it ended up not being too big of a hit, for the studio, for morale or anything, because we kind of knew going into it.
With the power of social media, leaks can now spread like wildfire. And Crash 4 unfortunately had screenshots leaked early. Now, of course, people who are fans of these games get excited and cling to these leaks, but rarely do we see or even hear the developer side of things when projects start to be shown off a bit too early in an unintended way. What were your thoughts at that point before release of the trailer, and how do you personally feel when leaks start popping up for projects that you're on?
Leaks suck.
Yep.
It's great that there is a level of excitement and we see the level of hunger, we see the level of enthusiasm. So it's a double-edged sword, right? You get the confirmation that what you're doing is going to be looked forward to, it's going to be valued, you'll be excited. But at the same time, I think a lot of people don't necessarily know how games are made. And so the conversation that we have with people about the games as we're making them isn't just, I think, the marketing side of it, of getting people excited, but it's also making sure that people understand what it is that we're doing and don't get any different misconceived notions and set themselves up for either disappointment or expecting one thing and getting another. A lot of times, when you're doing development, you're going to make stuff that you end up cutting. You're going to find paths that you actually think were the right idea versus the wrong idea. You're going to take gambles and bets that don't prove out, and then you end up pivoting at the last moment. And it's a part of every single creative endeavor. But I think when you do it openly, or when you do it with people who have been so hungry and have been scrutinizing things, they tend to get beholden or coming up with that picture in their mind that sometimes if you say make that pivot or make that cut or make that change, then it just feels like a problem. And it's like, why was that, not part of it? Why was this not part of it? I think to me, it's kind of important for us to figure that path out in a way internally and kind of in a pure standpoint. So that way, when we talk about it, we know what we're talking about. Because I think making games is a whirling dervish of chaos that somehow kind of forms toward the end. And then you start talking about it because you can actually speak with some authority about what it is that you're making. So leaks suck. Again, though, we saw a really great hunger for people and really, enthusiastic response. So that was great. Obviously, would love not to leak. But what are you going to do?
The Crash Bandicoot fan base is full of very, very vocal groups.
No.
Whether it be to remake Twinsanity or to rage about Crash of the Titans, they make sure that their point is made. So I wanted to read to you some statements and critiques that have been made by both negative and positive fans that are critics of Crash 4. To give you an idea, I sent out a tweet and a post on YouTube, and combined there were over 500 unique comments with statements. I also looked over 100 critic reviews, so the following statements are kind of a culmination of these critics and fans. So
all right.
I want to hear your thoughts and feelings as a developer to these statements. So the first one is, Crash Bandicoot 4 has, quote, some design choices that feel sadistic rather than simply difficult. Some examples included are boxes that are way too hidden, difficult crystals in the inverted mode specifically, and many, many stage hazards. Your thoughts?
Wimp. No, no, not at all. So as far as sadism, accusations of sadism, no. Honestly, like one of the ways that we thought about the game, and I mentioned it before, playing this game and playing this style of game, you have a development of muscle memory, of accumulation of skills, of map knowledge, of character knowledge, of things like that. Obviously during development, we're playing it a lot. And I will fully own up to the fact that, again, I thought it was too easy up until launch. It's hard to gauge because you've got people who've been playing the original games for 20 plus years, making it look easy, like they're running through that thing without a moment's notice. And so it's like, are we making it for them? Are we making it for new people? Finding that balance is extremely difficult. But one of the tenets of development we had was we didn't want to make the player feel like they were cheated. Yeah, it's mean. Yeah, it's hard, but it's fair. We're not like, haha, pulling the rug out from under them. Like an example is when you see some of the crazy stuff that was coming around, like when Super Mario Maker 2 came out, where it's like, just kidding, that block has spikes. Like that wasn't something that we wanted to go for.
Right.
We wanted to go for something where it's like, yeah, you saw the challenge ahead of you, you knew what was coming, and you had to figure out how to execute. And again, it's hard by design. It's a hard game. And I think all those different elements, but at the same time, this is, to me, a meal for the people who've been waiting for a long time. And we did a lot of things toward the end to try and rein in some of those harder elements once we started getting it into people's hands, and worked really hard on trying to make sure that it wasn't sadistic. I think there's some areas, like the crate question or the box, there's one box left, there's one hidden box. I think some of that, yeah, sure, we could have recalculated, we could have recalibrated a little bit, especially some of the hidden ones. But at the same time, I think there's a different mentality in gameplay than there was, when the originals came out, where I think the advent of the internet, obviously people can see where things are, but I think there was also this completionist mentality of, I want to be done with this game in a single play session that we didn't anticipate, where it's like, I want to 100%, I want to perfect it going through the first run. And it's like, no, we made this game to last. We made this game because we wanted people to have something to go back to and to still chew on, and something that would stick in their craw and get them thinking about this game after they've beaten it. Oh man, I wanted to go back and I can 100% of the level and get the insanely perfect. Well, that's the way that we were thinking about it, not necessarily the, all right, I'm going to go in, I'm going to be amazing my first time through, and then I'm going to be done with it. Because, that seemed different than the way we played the originals, and also we wanted to have something that had more legs. So
Crash Bandicoot 4's inverted levels feel like padding, and the filters at times are very painful on the eyes.
Lies. No. So as far as the inverted levels go, I think one of the things that you gotta, and this isn't to put it on the audience, this is on us, right? Which is platformers and single player games are almost digestible, right? Where it's like you do the level and then you move on. And then you do the level and then you move on. And yet that level, someone spent months making, and put a whole lot of content in it, a whole lot of figuring out. And so what you're seeing with things like the different goals, as well as the inverted mode, is almost us riffing on this general exploration of how do we make linear platformers more replayable. You go back to Super Mario, when you're done with 1-1, you're not like going back to 1-1. There's no reason to. You're putting all this development effort, you're making this really cool playground, and we're just coming up with different ways where this heavy, development investment, and also just this great playground of opportunity could get additional gameplay for different people. When you make a game, a lot of times you're making all these different, elements, and then you're kind of figuring out ways for them to cohere, and then you're tying different things into it. And I think when you add in that meta layer of those skins, you add in, the different completionist metrics, and you add in that mentality of people wanting to just consume, then it feels like padding, or to some folks, it feels like a hurdle on their way to getting to this ultimate goal of completion. I actually think it was a really great experiment, and some work better than others, and some are more, gameplay impacting than others. But I think one of the general early ideas was just even mirroring the level. The thesis there is this game's all about, developing a muscle memory, and what if we kind of tweak that? Does that feel like substantial enough of a change that this experience feels fresh again? And I think for some folks it succeeded. I think for some folks it didn't, and I think this is just an additional learning for us. It's also an additional learning on kind of the creation of, propulsive single player, linear based platformers.
Cooling down, we're going to go to questions that we're going to be sourcing again from the over 500 comments that we got. One of the top voted comments, honestly, was very shocked, was the Entropy fight. And people were asking if there was any phases that were removed, or was at one point Entropy the final boss, or because a lot of people had so many questions about that boss fight and Entropy in general. So do you want to shine a little bit of a light on that?
So Entropy was never meant to be the final boss. The arc of the game was meant to make it feel like it was the final boss, and then that the backwards emotional reset for Cortex was kind of a narrative twist, right? So we even toyed with the idea of playing false credits and, doing additional things after that Entropy fight to really feel like, hey, this main kind of narrative arc has, concluded, and then, oh yeah, Cortex has kind of gone back to his old ways. And so that was by design from the get-go. As far as phases, yeah, folks have kind of guessed that there was an additional ending phase. There was. But you know what? There were phases and alterations in all of the boss fights. There's just, the way that development works is that you're just trying to find the fun. And that level in particular is almost like 3 to 4 boss fights in one, right? Because of all the different phases. And, credit to our boss designer, but there were so many different things going on that when push came to shove of us trying to focus in on what is the fun, what is kind of the main arc of this, that ending phase was cut out, and then the previous phase, which was kind of running around the perimeter of kind of the cylinder, became the final one. And so then that got more additional work on dodging the projectiles and directly attacking the entropies, because originally that cylinder had more focus on breaking a shield, and then you'd go into the next phase, and that next phase was more kind of like bullet hell waves of content there. And so again, that last part did get excised, and we focused in on the different phases, even adding in more to those earlier waves to help bolster them and make them feel more fully featured. But again, that's something that goes on with all areas of development, all levels, all boss fights. Like the engine drummer boss fight originally wasn't even a drummer. It was like a giant golem slamming its fists,
Cool.
So it's not like anything nefarious where it got to the very end and we're just like, yoink! And it's on like it's not a movie, it's not
right.
Like there's deleted scenes on the cutting room floor of stuff that we made and then excised. It's just iteration.
Crash 4 has 5 playable characters. Were there any other playable characters on the table while you were developing? Or was the cast that you have now basically what you wanted and that was it?
There weren't any, cut additional characters. The way that we kind of started was what we called the big black conspiracy board. We had these giant black foam core boards throughout the office that we'd pin stuff onto, and we ended up doing like this kind of draft of characters where we had a whole list of characters, and then we were trying to plot narratives and usage and things out of them. And so then it kind of became this question of how do we bring in more of the bench, how do we bring in more of this great crew of characters. And the idea of trying out these different playable characters was really appealing to our studio, just because we have that history of playable characters. We have a history of Skylanders, of and even the Spyro Reignited trilogy of making these different experiences, making these different kind of fun things to play. And so it was a really big kind of push from our team internally of like, hey, we'd love to come up with experiences for additional characters. And the proposals from the team were the characters we ended up on. And then it became okay, well, how do they kind of fit into the narrative? How do they fit into just the overarching core of the game? Like even just the notion of these alternate timeline levels was something that went through a million different versions. At one point it was a pickup. At one point it was if you replayed the level. Another point it was, we'd do that as the main level, and then the Crash experience would be, or it was a player choice, or, it just took a lot to ultimately end up where we ended up, which was partly, again, that focus on making sure that the Crash experience was the core. It was trying to figure out the narrative and how they all fit together. And then kind of just ultimately choosing a path and going with it.
Yeah, because the questions that a lot of people asked was Nina Cortex. That was the big one. That was the biggest one they were asking about. Okay, so Crash 4 has a bunch of worlds that have matching level themes, from futuristic fast food cities, New Orleans ghost parades, and ancient Jurassic history. Was there a level theme that was debated about or changed? And is there a level theme that you wanted to see but didn't quite make it?
We sent our artists on many different areas, many different types of places to ideate. Or where we ended up was the vast majority of our level ideas, but a lot of them were refactored to fit, in, right? So like if you look at the space type themed levels, we've got, some on a spaceship, we've got some on Bermugula, we got, that's us trying to like jam as many different, ideas into a single, unit as possible. And I think each of those could have been its own thing. We could have had an entire, set of levels just on spaceships. We could have had even more levels on Bermugula, and so I think each of them kind of have their own areas where we could have expanded or chosen a different way of going with. But I'm really, really happy with where we netted out. As far as, things that I would have liked to see or changes, we initially kind of were toying with this idea of looking at Crash 1's, original kind of Wumpa Islands setup and trying to emulate alternate dimensions for each of them. I think, we did a good job with that, obviously, with, Insanity Beach and that kind of the general area. There could have been some more focus on that kind of moment in the original games where it starts to meld from nature and technology. And I think instead we started to go with unique and wanted to kind of set our own path. As far as, places that I'd love to go, honestly, there are so many different areas and different ways. I think one of the things that could be really interesting is, how Crash 3 starts doing different countries and different cultures. I think there could be a really interesting game where you start to modernize the look and modernize kind of the visits of these different cultures, because what they had in those games were these original kind of old archetypal settings. It's ancient Egypt focused on the pyramids, and I think you could do something really interesting where you're actively working with, people of those cultures to come up with, really unique settings in a more modern eye.
After all that is said and done, Crash 4 turned out being one of Toys for Bob's highest critically acclaimed games on Metacritic. On top of that, it also became the only platforming Crash title outside of the Naughty Dog trilogy to be on par or almost on par in terms of critic success. Now, this is a difficult task, as there have been many different companies who have tried to do this with varying degrees of success. What do you think is the secret sauce that allowed Crash 4 to be such a standout game after the Naughty Dog trilogy?
I mean, tooting our own horn, we have a wonderful team. We've got a really great, passionate studio that loves to make this type of game. Now, if I were to look at the actual product itself, I think one of the things that we did was we didn't try to take, and again, this is not casting any, shade or
sure, no,
or
of course.
The other studios that, all respect given, they did. What we did was not try to take the characters and the narrative and put it into a different type of game. What we did was really laser focused in on, this original type of gameplay that, if I'm being honest, like the way that I thought of it is, there's almost like an alternate, and again, I'm getting into the multiverse, which there's a weird alternate dimension where Mario 64 didn't come out and Crash led the charge into, 3D platforming. What we wanted to do was kind of explore this alternate development history where that was kind of what happened, where this kind of type of platformer became the predominant platforming language and continued on. And so what we did was we were really laser focused in on what was appealing about those original games, what made them feel special, what made them feel unique, and then take that foundation and amplify it and multiply it, not break the foundation and change it. And so everything that we added, from characters to flashback levels to inverted levels to quantum masks, was to take that original foundation and make it shine. And so that was our main focus. So everything that we did, we wanted to make sure it didn't feel like a mini game. We wanted to make sure it didn't feel like you were doing something that wasn't affecting that core foundation. And so, all those quantum masks, they could have been like flying a biplane, but that's taking away from that foundation. That's doing a mini game. That's changing mechanics. That's changing that foundation. It's changing it into a different style of play. And so what we really focused on was, how do we preserve the foundation? And then everything that we do in addition has to, again, refer back to that. So I think that is where kind of we went that other developers haven't, is spending so much time trying to polish that foundation and multiply it.
Looking back, if you were to develop the game again, would you change anything? Would you add or subtract anything? Or are you happy with it as is 100%?
I mean, I'm extraordinarily pleased with the game. I love, what we did and I love what we made. Obviously, you know, I've personally heard the difficulty claims. I've heard the claims on the 100% completion metrics. I've heard, you know, things from the time trials should have not had as high of a bar to clear. Like, you know, sure, you know, but at the same time, you take your shot and you choose it and you go down that path. And it's better to make a decision and actually execute than it is to waffle and try and, you know, second guess everything that you've done. So if I would change anything at this point, no, because I wanted to learn from it. I want us to learn from it. I want to see, you know, what worked, what didn't. And I think, you know, the game that we put out there is something that we're all extremely proud of. I know personally, it's the most fun I've ever had working on a game, and it's probably the proudest that I've ever been releasing a product into the world. And so, no, I don't think I'd change a thing because I want to get the response and the learnings from it.
Overall, did you personally feel that Crash Bandicoot 4 delivered what you set out to do when you started to work on this project?
Heck yeah. In fact, I think it actually became bigger as we went. It's one of the few games where we just kept adding stuff. And like, oh man, it'd be great if we did this. And, you know, obviously they made some folks on the team completely insane. You know, they would not have liked to do that. But at the same time, I think what we ended up delivering had an abundance of content, of gameplay, of ideas, of joy, of fun, of, you know, all sorts of things. And so I think we absolutely set out to deliver what we wanted to do, which was both a love letter to the original trilogy, you know, that we all, you know, fell in love with, but also, you know, to put new ideas out in the world and to try and, you know, explore and riff on kind of this fundamental kind of platforming language that people hadn't played with in a long time. And I think from, you know, a creative standpoint, I'm super pleased with the game.
What is the future for Crash? Is there anything we should be looking forward to?
I mean, the future is infinite, man.
Okay, and if you had one message to say to the fans, what would it be?
You know, I've said it before, but thank you. Honestly, it's a dream to get to play in, you know, a really robust and really, you know, exciting universe like Crash. And, you know, I honestly couldn't be happier with, again, the game that we made, the response that people have been having, the continued conversation around it. You know, seeing the uptick of players recently has been really exciting. We just absolutely loved making that game, and to see it bring kind of joy to people and to see people to talk about it and even, you know, have crazy conspiracies of like, was this part of the game cut, or why did they do this? It's like, none of us are wearing tinfoil hats. We're making a fun thing, you know. We're not trying to, there's no ulterior, you know, crazy motive other than, can we, you know, pull off something that seemed, you know, initially pretty outlandish, which is to make a successor to kind of these games that we all loved. And so the fact that it's resonated honestly warms the heck out of my heart. So thank you all. Thanks everybody. Keep sending questions, keep asking, keep the conversation going. That's kind of all I gotta say. My only regret is that there's no version of the axolotl squirrel as an animated GIF similar to the otter doing like the stomach roll holding the fish. I want the axolotl squirrel holding a wumpa doing the kind of, yeah. I want an entire YouTube series of Canadian guy axolotl questions.
Oh God.